On the morning of the great action of the trial for breach of promise of marriage, Bardell against Pickwick, the defendant, Mr. Pickwick, being escorted in, stood up in a state of agitation and took a glance around him. A sensation was then perceptible in the body of the court, and Mrs. Bardell, the plaintiff, supported by Mrs. Cluppins, her bosom friend number one, was led in a drooping state. The plaintiff, gentlemen, is a widow. Yes, gentlemen, a widow. The late Mr. Thomas Bardell, after enjoying for many years the confidence and esteem of his sovereign as one of the guardians of his royal revenues, glided almost imperceptibly from the world to seek elsewhere for that repose and peace which a custom house can never afford. This was a pathetic description of the death of Mr. Bardell, who was knocked on the head by a quart pot in a public-house cellar. Some time before Mr. Bardell's death, he had stamped his likeness on a little boy. With this little boy, the only pledge of her departed exciseman, Mrs. Bardell shrank from the world and courted the retirement and tranquillity of Goswell Street. And here she placed in her front parlour window a written placard bearing this inscription: "Apartments furnished for a single gentleman. Inquire within." Sergeant Buzfuz here paused, while several gentlemen of the jury made a note of the document. "There is no date to that, is there, sir?" inquired a juryman, leaning forward. "No, there is no date, gentlemen, but I am instructed to say that it was put in the parlour window just this time 3 years. Now, I entreat the attention of the jury to the wording of this document. Apartments furnished for a single gentleman. Mr. Bardell said, the widow, Mr. Bardell was a man of honour. Mr. Bardell was a man of his word. Mr. Bardell was no deceiver. Mr. Bardell was once a single gentleman himself. In single gentleman I shall perpetually see something to remind me of what Mr. Bardell was when he first won my youthful and untried affections. To a single gentleman shall my apartments be let." Actuated by this beautiful and touching impulse, among the best impulses of our imperfect nature, gentlemen, the desolate widow dried her tears, furnished her first floor, caught her innocent boy to her maternal bosom, and put the placard up in her parlour window. Did it remain there long? No. Before it had been there 3 days, 3 days, gentlemen, a being erect upon 2 legs, and bearing all the outward semblance of a man, and not of a monster, knocked at Mrs. Bardell's door. He inquired within. He took the apartments, and on the very next day he entered into possession of them. That man was Pickwick. Pickwick, the defendant. "Call Elizabeth Cluppins," said Sergeant Buzfuz. Do you recollect, Mrs. Cluppins, do you recollect being in Mrs. Bardell's back one pair of stairs one particular morning in July last? Well, yes, my lord and jury, I do. Mrs. Bardell's sitting room was the first floor front, I believe. Oh, yes, my lord and jury, it were. Court. Oh, what were you doing in the back room, ma'am? My lord and jury, I will not deceive you. Court. You had better not, ma'am. Well, I was there unbeknown to Mrs. Bardell. I'd been out with a little basket to buy £3 of red kidney potatoes, which was £3 twopence halfpenny, when I see Mrs. Bardell's street door on the jar. Court. On the what? Well, it's partly open, my lord. Court. But she said on the jar. It's all the same, my lord. The little judge looked doubtful and said he'd make a note of it. Well, I went in just to say good morning and walked in a promiscuous manner up the stairs and into the back room. Well, gentlemen, there was voices coming from the front room, and you listened, I believe, Mrs. Cluppins. Begging your pardon, sir, I would scorn the action. The voices was very loud, sir, and forced themselves upon my ear. Well, Mrs. Cluppins, you did not listen, but you heard the voices. Was one of those voices Pickwick's? Oh, yes, it were, sir. Mr. Winkle was then examined by Mr. Skimpin. Now, sir, have the goodness to let his lordship and the jury know what your name is, will you? Mr. Skimpin inclined his head to one side and listened with great sharpness for the answer, as if to imply that he rather thought that Mr. Winkle's natural taste for perjury would induce him to give some name which did not belong to him. Well, it's Winkle. Court. Have you any Christian name, sir? Nathaniel, sir. My lord, I mean. Court. Daniel. Any other name? Nathaniel, my lord. Court. Nathaniel. Daniel. Or Daniel. Nathaniel. No, my lord. Only Nathaniel, not Daniel at all. Court. Well, what did you tell me it was Daniel for, then, sir? I didn't, my lord. Court, you did, sir. How could I have got Daniel on my notes unless you told me so, sir? Mr. Winkle has rather a short memory, my lord, but we shall have occasion to refresh it before we have quite done with him, I dare say. Now, Mr. Winkle, attend to me, if you please, sir, and let me recommend you be careful. I believe you are a particular friend of Pickwick, the defendant in this case. Are you not? Well, I have known Mr. Pickwick now, as well as I can recollect at this moment, for nearly— Pray, Mr. Winkle, do not evade my question. Are you, or are you not, a particular friend of the defendant? Well, I was just going to say that. Will you or will you not answer my question, sir? Court. If you don't answer the question, you'll be sent to moulder in jail, sir. Well, God bless my soul. Well, yes. Yes, I am. Yes, you are. And couldn't you say that at once, sir? Perhaps you know the plaintiff, too, Mr. Winkle? Well, I don't know her, but I've seen her. Oh, you don't know her, but you have seen her. Now tell the gentlemen of the jury what you mean by that, Mr. Winkle. God bless my soul. I mean, that I am not intimate with her. That I've seen her when I've been to call on Mr. Pickwick in Goswell Street. How often have you seen her, sir? How often? Yes, Mr. Winkle, how often? I'll repeat the question for you 12 times if you require it, sir. Sergeant Buzfuz now rose with more dignity than he had yet exhibited, if that were possible, and said, "Call Samuel Weller." It was quite unnecessary to call Samuel Weller, for Samuel Weller stepped into the box the instant his name was pronounced, and placing his hat on the floor and his hands on the rail, took a bird's-eye view of the bar and a comprehensive survey of the bench with a remarkably cheerful and lively aspect. "Court, what's your name, sir?" "Sam Weller, me lord." "Court, do you spell that with a V or with a W?" "Well, that depends upon the taste and fancy of the speller, me lord. I never had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in me life, but I spells it with a V." Here a voice from the gallery exclaimed, "Quite right too, Samuel, quite right. Put it down a V, me lord, put it down a V." "Court, who is that? Who dares to address the court?" "Usher." "Yes, my lord." "Court, bring that person here instantly." "Yes, my lord." But as the usher didn't find the person, he didn't bring him, and after a great commotion, everybody who had got up to look for the culprit sat down again. The little judge turned to Sam as soon as his indignation would allow him to speak, and said, "Court, do you know who that was, sir?" "Well, I rather suspect it was me father, me lord." "Court, do you see him here now?" Sam looked up into the lantern in the roof of the court and said, "I know, me lord. I can't say as I do see him at this here present moment." "Court, if you could have pointed him out, I would have sent him to jail instantly." Sam bowed his acknowledgments.